Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang namasami. So this is chapter 9 in this collection. This is originally from the book Cittaviveka, and this is called the Practice of Metta. I'd like to talk about the practice of metta, a meditation which most people will find very useful. Metta is generally translated as loving kindness. This may be too big a word, because we tend to think of loving kindness as grand and wonderful, and sometimes we cannot generate that kind of love for everything. The English word love is often misused. We say, I love to eat fish and chips, when what we mean is, I like to eat fish and chips. Christians talk about Christian love. This means loving your enemies. It doesn't mean liking them. How can you like your enemies? But we can love them, which means that we will not do anything to harm them. We will not dwell in aversion towards them. You can be kind to your enemies, kind towards people who are not very nice to you, who insult you, and who wish you harm. They may be unpleasant people whom you cannot like, but can love. Metta is not a superman's love. It's the very ordinary ability just to be kind and not dwell in aversion towards something or someone. If a man walked into this room right now, drunk, ugly, diseased, stinking, cursing and swearing, we could not even consider liking him, but we could be kind to him. We wouldn't have to punch him in the nose, curse him and force him out of the room. We could invite him in, give him a cup of tea. We can be kind. We can do something for someone who is repulsive and disgusting in some way. When we think to ourselves, I can't stand that man, get him out of here, he's disgusting, it becomes impossible to be kind, and we create suffering around what is unpleasant to us. There's a great lack of metta in the world today because we've overdeveloped our critical faculties. We constantly analyze and criticize. We dwell on what is wrong with ourselves, with others, with the society we live in. Metta, however, means not dwelling in aversion, but being kind and patient even to what is bad, evil, foul or terrible. It's easy to be kind to nice animals like kittens and puppies. It's easy to be kind to people that we like, such as sweet little children, especially when they're not ours. It's easy to be kind to old ladies and men when we don't have to live with them. It's easy to be kind to those who agree with us politically and philosophically and who do not threaten us in any way. It's much more difficult to be kind to those that we don't like, who threaten us or disgust us. That takes much more endurance. First, we have to start with ourselves. So in traditional Buddhist style, we always start the practice of metta by having metta for ourselves. This does not mean that we say, I really love myself, I really like me. When we practice metta towards ourselves, we no longer dwell in aversion to ourselves. We extend kindness to ourselves, to our conditions of body and mind. We extend kindness and patience even to faults and failings, to bad thoughts, moods, anger, greed, fears, doubts and jealousies, delusions, all that we may not like about ourselves. When I first went to England, I asked the Buddhist people there whether they practiced metta. They said, no, can't stand it. It's so false. We're supposed to go around saying, I like myself, I love myself, may I be happy? It's so soppy, wet, foolish. I really don't feel like it. It seems so false and superficial. On that level it sounded a bit silly to me too, until I realized that it wasn't taught in the right way and had become a sentimental, cosmetic covering up of things. People in England could not go along with that. They'd rather sit and analyse themselves, looking at their faults and exaggerate them out of all proportion. They thought they were being honest with themselves. But practicing metta towards ourselves means we stop trying to find all our weaknesses, faults and imperfections. Often when you have a bad mood or start to feel depressed, you think, here I go again, I'm worthless. When this happens, have metta for the depression itself. Don't make a bad thing out of it. Don't complicate it. Be at peace with it. Coexist peacefully with depression, fears, doubts, anger or jealousy. Don't create anything around them and aversion. Don't create anything around them with aversion. Last year, a woman came to ask me about depression. She said, I suffer from depression on occasions. I know it's bad, I know I shouldn't, and I want to know what to do about it. I really don't want it. I want to get rid of it. What do you suggest? Now, what is wrong with depression? You think you should never feel depressed because you have an idea that there's something wrong with you for being that way. But sometimes life just isn't very pleasant. It can be downright depressing. You can't expect life to be always pleasant, inspiring and wonderful. I know how depression arises when there are unhappy things and unpleasant scenes around. I saw a lot of it in my first year in England. After living in a warm, sunny country like Thailand, where the people have great respect for monks, always addressing them as Venerable Sir, giving them things and treating them as if they were terribly important, I found that in England some people treat monks as if they're crazy. London isn't sunny and smiling. It can be drizzling and cold, and people aren't interested in you at all. They look at you and then they turn away without giving you a smile. In Thailand, life was so simple and easy for a Buddhist monk. We had nice forest monasteries in natural surroundings and our own little huts among the trees. In London, we were cooped up in a little house day after day, kept indoors by the drizzling rain and cold. So, all the monks began to feel depressed and negative. We would just go through the motions of being monks. We'd get up at 4 a.m, go to the shrine room, do a little chanting, get that over with, and then sit in meditation for a while, drink tea, go out for a walk, just going through the motions. We weren't putting energy into anything that we were doing. We were becoming caught up in that which was depressing. There was also a lot of friction, with problems in the group which had invited us to England, and a lot of personality clashes and misunderstandings. When I reflected on this, I began to see that I was becoming caught up in the unpleasant things that were happening around me. I was creating negative feelings around them. I was wishing I was back in Thailand, wishing the unpleasant things would go away, wishing it wouldn't be the way it was, worrying about people and wishing they were otherwise. I began to realize that I was dwelling in aversion on the unpleasant things around me. A lot of unpleasant things were happening, and I was creating aversion around them all. I was complicating them all in my mind, and thus suffering from them. So, we decided to put effort into just being there. We stopped complaining. We stopped demanding or even thinking and wishing about being somewhere else. We began to put energy into our practice, getting up early, doing exercises to keep warm. And we even began to feel much better. Everything around us was the same, but we learnt not to create problems within ourselves over those difficulties. When you have high expectations for yourself, thinking you have to be Superman or Wonder Woman, then of course you don't have much metta, because only very seldom can we live up to such a high standard. You become doubtful of yourself. Maybe I'm not good enough. By practicing metta towards yourself, you can stop doing that. You begin to forgive yourself for making mistakes, for giving into weaknesses. That doesn't mean you rationalize things away, but rather that you do not go on creating problems or dwelling in aversion on the faults you have and the mistakes you have made. So by applying the practice of metta inwardly, we can become a lot more peaceful within ourselves and with the conditions of our minds and bodies. We become more mindful and aware, more awake to the way things are. Wisdom begins to arise, and we can see how we create unnecessary problems all the time by just following the momentum of habit. Metta means a little more than just kindness. It's a penetrating kindness, a kind awareness. Metta means we can coexist peacefully in a kindly way with sentient beings, both those voices and personae within us and with beings outside. It doesn't mean liking them. Some people go to that extreme. They say, I love my weaknesses because they're really me. I wouldn't be me if I didn't have my wonderful weaknesses. That's silly. Metta is being patient, being able to coexist with the pests of our minds rather than trying to annihilate them. Our society is very much one which annihilates pests, both inwardly and outwardly, wanting to create an environment where there are no pests. I've heard monks say, "I can't meditate because there are too many mosquitoes. If only we could get rid of them." You may never really like the mosquitoes, but you can have metta for them, respecting their right to exist and not getting caught up in resentment at their presence. Similarly, if I have metta for the depressed mood of the moment and allow it to be there, recognizing it and not demanding that it not be there, it will go. Feelings like these arise naturally and go away. We make them stay longer because we keep wanting them to go. The struggle of trying to get rid of something we do not like seems to make it last longer than it would otherwise. The more we try to control nature, to manipulate it according to our greed and desire, the more we end up polluting the whole earth. People are becoming really worried now because we can see so much pollution from all the chemicals and pesticides we use to try to get rid of the things in nature that we don't want. When we try to annihilate the pests in our minds, we end up with pollution too. We have a nervous breakdown, and then the pests come back stronger than ever. Our modern society does not encourage much metta towards the old, the sick and the dying. Our society is very much oriented towards youth and vigour, being fast and staying young for as long as possible. When you grow old, you seem useless. You can't do anything very well. You're slow. You're no longer attractive, so people don't really want to know you. Many old people feel they have no place in society. They grow old and are cast aside as useless people. Our society also treats the intellectually handicapped and the mentally ill in this way. We try to keep them away so that we don't have to look at them and know that they're around. But trying to ignore the facts of life such as death, infirmity and old age results in an increasing amount of mental illness, mental breakdown and alcoholism. In schools in the United States, we tried to put all the intelligent students with high IQs together in one class and the slower ones in another. We did not want the intelligent students to be slowed down by the halting progress of the slow ones. I think the most important thing the intelligent can learn is to be kind and patient towards those who are not as intelligent or as quick as they are. When we're forced to compete with our own kind, life becomes hectic and frustrating. Kindness, patience and compassion are much more helpful qualities for knowing how to live in the world than getting first prize and coming first in the class. Feeling that we always have to strive and compete to survive makes us neurotic and miserable. Those who can't compete feel inferior and just drop out. We have frustration and unfulfillment among both the gifted and the not so gifted, because metta has never been considered important. When we practice metta, we begin to be willing to learn from termites and ants, from people who are slow, from the old, sick and dying. We become willing to take time out, to take care of somebody who's ill, and that takes patience. We become willing to take time out of our busy lives to help and be with somebody who's dying. We become willing to try to contemplate and understand dying. This is the direction we must take to create a really humane and good society. But before we can start making great changes in society, we have to start with ourselves, having metta for the conditions of our minds and bodies. We can have metta for the disease when we're ill. That doesn't mean that we're going to help the disease to stay longer, or that we should not have an injection of penicillin because we're having metta for all the little germs infecting us. It means not dwelling in aversion to the discomfort and the weakness of our bodies when they're ill. We can learn to meditate on the fevers, fatigue, bodily pain and aches that we all experience. We don't have to like them. All we need to do is take the time to endure them and try to understand them, rather than just resenting them. When we do not have metta, we tend just to react to those conditions with the desire to annihilate, and the desire to annihilate always takes us to despair. We keep on recreating all the time the conditions for despair in our minds when we just try to annihilate all that we do not like and do not want. Living in a Buddhist monastery is good training for learning to live with people. As a layman, I had some control over my associates, keeping close to certain friends with whom I liked to be, and staying away from anyone I did not like. But in the monastery, I had no choice. I had to live with whoever was there, whether I liked them or not. So sometimes I had to live with people I didn't like, or found irritating and annoying. That was good for me, because I began to understand people I would never have taken the time to understand otherwise. If I had had a choice, I would not have lived with some of those people. But as that choice was not available, I learnt to be more sensitive and open. I learned to have metta and allow people to be as they are, rather than always trying to force them to change, forcing them to be as I would like them, or trying to get rid of them. Wisdom arises when we begin to accept all the different beings, both within ourselves and outside, rather than always trying to manipulate things so that they're convenient and pleasant for us all the time, so that we do not have to be confronted with irritating and troublesome people and situations. Let's face it, the world is an irritating place. I learnt from my own experience how frustrating life is when I have ideas of how I want it to be. So I began to look at my own suffering, rather than just trying to control everything according to my desires. Instead of making requests and demands or trying to control everything, I began to flow with life, and that was much easier in the long run than all the manipulation that I used to do. We can still be fully aware of imperfections and not dismiss them or be irresponsible. The practice of metta means we don't create problems around them by dwelling in aversion. We can allow ourselves to flow with life. Our experience of life sometimes isn't very pleasant, enjoyable or beautiful. At other times it's all of these. That's the way life is. The wise person can always learn from both extremes, not attaching to either and not creating problems, but coexisting peacefully with all conditions. This is a perennially useful theme, over and over again, in your position, like myself, invited to teach, or people come and ask for advice. Over and over and over again, there's this dynamic of, I've got the problem with X, I'm angry with my children not being respectful, or I feel jealous that my ex-husband is now marrying somebody else. How can I get rid of this feeling of jealousy? How can I have love towards my children when I get angry that they're so disrespectful and difficult? And it's a dozen, 100 different kind of modes that this takes. And so this is, I'm quoting basically from this talk and this advice that Luang Por Sumedho would give over and over and over again, how it's not what we feel like. We have this model of the perfect me would never be jealous of anybody, or the perfect me I would always have total love for my children, or I would always be kind and patient, peaceful and wise and calm and skillful, not proud and demanding in nature. That we have this idea of the perfect me would be like that, peaceful and wise and calm and so on. And then so we create this abstracted image of ourselves, and then compare what we're feeling with that perfect image, the image of the perfect me, and then feel like we're falling short. I've got to get rid of this anger problem, or this jealousy problem, or this fear problem, or this these doubts, so that and once I've got rid of them, then they'll be me. They'll be the me without the anger, me without jealousy, me without the problems. But it never really works that way, because just as Luang Por says, several times, 3 or 4 or 5 times in the course of this one talk, the more you try and push those things out of the way and get rid of them, you empower them. You strengthen them by the very fact of, I want to get rid of that. And so, what is such helpful advice I found for myself, and I pass it on over and over again, is rather than trying to climb over the anger to get to the place where there's me without anger, or me without fear, or me without jealousy, that it's more helpful to cultivate this quality of metta for that very emotion. So having metta for the anger, metta for your jealousy, metta for your confusion and your doubts, and and as he says again over and over in this talk, it's not a matter of liking, or saying, oh, my anger is a wonderful thing, or I'm really so glad that I'm filled with doubts, and I think I should cultivate more jealousy. It'll really help things along. It's not a kind of stupid approach like that. But as he points out, it's recognizing that that's a quality that's present. This anger is present. It's what's here. It's what's arisen. It's this feeling of jealousy or fear or negativity, whatever the afflicted emotional state might be. So you're not condoning it. You're not feeding it, but you're recognizing anger exists in nature. We have a mind. We have a body. So the system is capable of creating fear, or anger, or jealousy, or greed, selfishness. That's part of the program. So because there's a mind, there's a body, then those things are going to be experienced. And this is such helpful advice, because we tend to live from this idea of, like, we create this abstracted image of ourselves, and then compare ourselves with that sort of abstracted perfect me who doesn't really exist, and the way we are always falls short. And so I feel Lumpur Sumedho articulates it in such a clear and direct way. It's so helpful, that we, rather than creating an ideal picture of me, sort of that's over there, and trying to become that perfect me, that instead we look at what's here. We look at the flow of feelings and perceptions, both acknowledging the difficult and painful ones, but also acknowledging and accepting the wholesome and beautiful qualities. Sometimes it's more difficult to accept and to acknowledge your goodness, and the fact that you're a kind person, that you're a generous and unselfish person. That can be harder, especially for English people. That that you're actually a good person. It feels like, oh, I can't say that. Oh dear, no. Because it feels like you're being inflated, or that you're going to create conceit or pride within yourself. And so in a way that, as you said, feeling you're being honest by dwelling on all your faults, and trying to get rid of them. But this simple process of having metta, particularly for what he's pointing out here, that these negative emotions or difficult qualities, the way I like to phrase it is to say, to recognize that has its place in nature. Selfishness, fear, greed, jealousy, they exist. They're part of the natural order. You're not saying it's a fine and beautiful thing, or that your violence and selfishness is a grand and glorious thing. No, it's you're recognizing, I have the capacity to feel violent. I have the capacity to feel fear or jealousy or anxiety. Yeah, that's part of the system. So you're recognizing that this is part of nature. But in that recognition and acceptance of it as part of nature, you're also, in a way, developing the insight into not self. You're recognizing, oh yeah, well, it's this is a human life, and so that we experience these different things. So this is all part of the deal. We have the neocortex and all our high-minded thoughts and concepts, and we have the reptile brain, which says, "Mine, back off, more, kill." That is the kind of monosyllabic reptile brain of the precepts are there to help give us a perspective on. But that's part of our life. Just look at he's looking at the embryology of it, looking at the physiology of how we're made up, and our instinctual processes are very basic. They really are. I mean, I'm putting on a sort of silly voice, but that's what we feel. Like, mine, back off. It's my apple. You're trying to frighten the other person, because there's both of you going for the apples at the breakfast time, and so it's like the hyenas around the wildebeest. Like, no, I'm the top dog. Back off. It's my apple, Venerable Sir. We do it in kind of coded ways, but basically what we're saying is, that's my apple. Back off, or you're for it. So to recognize those forces are at play within us, and not to be frightened of them or pretend they're not there, or feel that we're somehow some sort of sick being because we feel aggressive and territorial over an apple. on the servery at breakfast time. But just recognize, oh, look at that, that's interesting. I'm showing my fangs to my brother in the holy life over what's available for breakfast. And then at that moment you are just like a hyena going at the wildebeest, and you're saying, I'm the top dog, back off. And that's, in that moment you reckon, well, that's part of our animal heritage. We can feel that kind of stuff. We don't have to be dominated by that. We don't have to praise it and think, what a wonderful thing, or be putting that in charge of our life, but recognizing, oh, look at that. That's my territory. Or somebody moves our cushion, shh. It's my zafu. We're ready to sort of get physical over somebody's moved your cushion, or you're taking your favorite blanket from the cupboard. And just to be able to see those forces at work. Oh, look at that! Isn't that interesting? How that is. So we're in a way looking at our own life as the different patterns of nature that are involved. And so metta, when I'm talking about metta practice, just as Luang Por does here, rather than having it as a kind of stylized sequence of phrases that you use, and oftentimes metta bhavana is taught in that way, that you go through this whole list of beings. May I be well, may I be happy, may my family be well, may they be happy, may those that I love be well and happy, may the people that I'm indifferent to, may they be well and happy, may the people who are averse to me also be well and happy, kind of going through a laundry list of different beings, or you can use a sort of geographical method. So oftentimes metta bhavana is taught in this sort of very systematic and kind of verbal way. So going through lists of beings, either different categories of beings or different, spreading out metta geographically. But I feel the way that Luang Por Sumedho talks about it here is far more useful, and virtually every retreat that I lead, pretty much on the first evening or first day of the retreat, I'll talk about using metta in this way, that rather than as a separate practice, distinct from developing concentration and insight, I try to present metta as being the underpinning or the foundation for all Dhamma practice. Because if we don't really have metta for all of our mind states, and also the people around us and the events of our day, if there isn't that kind of acceptance, well, this is the way things are, whether you like it or you don't like it, here it is, then it's really impossible to develop any kind of concentration or insight if there isn't that basis of metta. Because if there is that kind of partiality, like, I don't want this thought to be here, I don't want this mind state to, I don't want this doubt to be here, I don't want this fear to be here, you've got to get rid of you, then I can concentrate. Then you've got a fight going on in your mind. You're trying to banish all the stuff that you don't like. Whereas the way I like to talk about metta is, I use simple examples like directions on the road. Like I say, you go down to Great Gadsden. If you want to go to Hemel, turn right. If you want to go to Leighton Buzzard, turn left. It's not like the road to Leighton Buzzard is evil and the road to Hemel is good. It's just, if you want to go to Hemel, you take a right. It's not like the road to Leighton Buzzard is evil and awful and bad. It's just it won't get you to the place where you want to go. So similarly, when we meet with different mind states, then if what arises is, say, fear or anger or selfishness, then you realize, well, that's the road to Leighton Buzzard. I don't want to. I don't want to go there. And instead, you see that there's the quality of patience and kindness and focus and concentration, compassion. That's going to go to where you want to go. So you take a right. You turn right. So it's not like this is wonderful and good and I've got to keep it, or that road to Leighton Buzzard is evil and awful and should be destroyed. It's ridiculous. And so I feel it's far more helpful to look at our mind states in that simple, practical, down-to-earth way. It's like, well, Leighton Buzzard's got a perfect right to be there. We don't have to bomb it. I was using this as an example in a retreat, and at the end of the retreat, this woman said to me, I come from Leighton Buzzard, actually. It's all right. We don't need to bomb it. It's actually quite a nice town. But you're using this example to say, that's got the angry feelings or jealous feelings or territorial feelings. They've got a perfect right to be there. They're part of the natural order. My capacity to be violent or selfish, fine, it's there, but that's not a direction I want to go in. I need to go to Hemel. I don't want to go to Leighton Buzzard. So the road is there. You just don't take it. So you don't have to fear it. You don't have to be averse to it. You just recognize, okay, that road's going in a direction that I don't want to go. So you go the other way. So and that's how I feel that's the way that Luang Por is presenting it here is exactly like that. So there's this very practical and straightforward way of relating to that, and I use the phraseology radical acceptance. He was using not dwelling in aversion. And he developed that phrase in the first year or so he was in England because of this issue with the English people not liking the kind of metta practice. So as soon as you start talking about may all beings be happy, this kind of tension would come into the shrine room in Hampstead. So he said, okay, let's just work on not being averse. Let's talk about not dwelling in aversion. No one can do that. People could do that. But because it did, and I think that's a very good point, because people did feel there was this kind of smarmy sentimentality, like a sort of Walt Disney-ish version of reality, like thinking pink. You're sort of spraying this layer of sugar frosting over everything. It's like, ugh. And that feeling of this is really false. And it's quite common it wasn't not just in England, it's also in the States. I remember one person, a friend of ours, who did a whole day, a meditation day long at a local Buddhist center, and the theme of the day long was "I hate metta," and it was the whole theme of the day was like, as soon as someone says, "May all beings be happy," just notice that that kind of that's being told to be nice, or that trying to cover up everything with a sort of a veneer of pink sweetness instantly brings up aversion and negativity. And so it's quite common if you do. It's not uncommon if you do lead a guided metta meditation. People will say, "I was having a great retreat, Ajahn, until you did that metta meditation. I got so angry, so annoying." So it's a skill that we can develop. And it takes some effort, because, as you said, you're not justifying or condoning your own shortcomings and unskillful habits. You're not saying it's a wonderful thing, but that skill of recognizing, well, this has its place in the natural order. It belongs, and then but I just choose not to pick it up and follow it. And that's a skill that we can develop. That recognizing, it's here. Now, can I not pick that up? Can I not be afraid of it? Can I not reject it? Can I just recognize that's a turning I don't want to take? And then leave it alone. And so in developing the practice, I feel that's a crucial skill to develop, where we can see really unwholesome, unskillful mind states and not be intimidated by that and say, well, that's pretty horrible. Okay, fine. Let's just leave that aside and to not make anything more of it, as he said, not to complicate that. And then just to go back to maybe the last thing to say is to go back to having metta for our own goodness, acknowledging our own goodness. And this is I talk about this fairly often, because again in the West, when you are say looking at your own goodness, or reflecting on your own good qualities, it seems like you're trying to be inflated, or you're conceited. What a wonderful person I am! Look at me, I'm glorious. But there's one of the recollections that the Buddha gives, along like with recollections of the Buddha, the Dhamma, and Sangha, or recollections on death, Marananusati, or Buddhanusati, Dhammanusati, Sanghanusati. You have Chagganusati, and Chagganusati is a recollection of your own goodness. So the Buddha actively encourages us to bring to mind our own goodness, to reflect on the good things that we've done, but not for the purpose of making us more inflated or proud, or like I've made such a lot of merit and I'm such a good person, and not even comparing yourself to other people, but simply by recognizing those wholesome qualities in exactly the same way as if they belong to somebody else. Not taking it in a personal way, but like, oh, isn't it a wonderful thing that some people, I was patient in that difficult situation, somebody was getting very upset, and I put down what I was doing and I spent time with them, and it really helped. What a wonderful thing that people can do that. Not like, oh, I'm such a good person, I scored a lot of points with that one, but more, oh, that's a beautiful thing to have done. That really helped. That was a fine and noble, kindly act, and acknowledging the goodness. And then when that goodness is acknowledged and received in the same way, there's that same kind of acceptance of it. Then also, there's the recognition of the good result that comes from that. That in a way, acknowledging the bright result that comes from wholesome action. So that punya, or what we call the merit or the blessings, that's in a way the result of good karma, is that feeling of punya, is that quality of inner brightness. So when we reflect on our own goodness and our own kindly actions, then it brings up that kind of brightness, and it's not just self-respect, it's also a kind of effulgence, an inner joyfulness. So that, and as the Buddha said, that punya is another word for happiness. And there's a short discourse in the Itivuttaka where the Buddha says, don't belittle, don't look down on punya, don't think this is a kind of lower sort of, or inferior kind of quality or an inferior practice. Is punya is another word for happiness. Punya is to be developed and is worthy of cultivation. So, as I said, some people find it more difficult to recognize their own good qualities and their bad qualities. Much happier making a long list of everything that's wrong with me than. But it is a helpful thing, and to see that when that is done, that the beautiful result that comes from that, just acknowledging. And particularly if you're very self-critical, if you tend to have a very negative self-view, then and your mind is dwelling on all of your faults, then it's a little exercise I encourage for people to do, is to say, so if you were your best friend, and your best friend came up to you and said, "Oh, I'm such a terrible person because I've done this and I've done this and I've done this and I keep thinking like that." Yeah. If you were your best friend and you came up to you and your best friend gave you this long list of all their shortcomings and crimes, what's your first reaction? If you get the picture of what I'm saying. And every single time when I encourage anybody to do this exercise, every single time they said the first thought is one of forgiveness and compassion. Oh, it's not that bad. Don't worry. If you do that as a mental exercise, you're far more able to forgive other people for their shortcomings than you are yourself. So if you get the drift of what I'm saying, like if you just run that as a little thought experiment, it's a kind of pocket version of a kind of Gestalt therapy exercise. If you were your best friend and you just listen to that litany of wrongdoings, immediately what comes up is, oh, don't worry, it's not that bad. Don't be so hard on yourself. Have a cup of tea. It's all right. Immediately the mind moves towards forgiveness, kindness, consolation. I've never, ever, ever had anyone say that what arose in them was, yeah, right, let me tell you another thing. Never. It doesn't happen. Yeah. I'm waiting for the day when it does, and I'll maybe change my method. But so far, every time when anybody does that, people are quite surprised that, oh yeah, right, it's just without a second thought, the mind moves towards compassion, forgiveness, and and kindness. So I think that's enough from me rabbiting on. So if there's some particular questions or comments? Yes. Good evening.
Good evening. Yes. Yeah, good evening. All these qualities, happiness, that we speak about happiness and metta, when in theoretical way, it's very inspiring. But after in practical, is we ask to everybody in this room who want to be happy, everybody is going to say, I want to be happy. Because it's the rational answer.
Mm-hmm.
But after you give, when the people is suffering, coming and ask you for advice and say, oh, do some meditation, or do this, or do that, or avoid that, you have attachment to that. And the people, after 1 week, come back and say, I am still suffering. Why? You didn't do the meditation, you didn't do that. Mm-hmm. And look like the people is attached to suffering. They like suffering in some way. So, because in some way we are not rational, we are emotional. And what happened is, I saw one thing, I started to think about that. Why? And it's because when you have a pain, you scratch yourself, mm-hmm. and you get some endorphins, mm-hmm. so you get some pleasure, physical pleasure, mm-hmm. no? Sensual pleasure. Mm-hmm. When you have a fight, when your girlfriend, you know that 2 days after, you're going to get a lot of pleasure, emotional and physical pleasure in the reconciliation. So, in some way, we attach to the suffering to get some sensual pleasures. In some way.
In some ways, yeah.
In some way. So, I looking some solutions, no? Some solution for this. I was thinking, what is the solution, no? I always looking for a solution for the Buddha's teaching, no? And I find a very good solution that the unconditional mind, no? The unconditional mind to the physical reactions, no? I go to unconditional my mind to these physical reactions, so I can separate a little bit this world. But the thing that I find is that I cannot unconditional my mind totally, because if I unconditional my mind, I die, because breathing is a condition, for example. So can you make some?
Well, there's quite a few things in there. Well, Ajahn Chah was a master of coming up with little brief statements, like short statements, short things that he said that capture very clearly certain truths. So one of these, as you were speaking, came to mind, where he said, everybody wants happiness, but nobody likes to create the causes of happiness. Nobody likes suffering, but everybody likes to create the causes of suffering. So you could sit on that for the rest of the week. You know? So that's part of it, is that that we like the things that cause dukkha. You know, like to attack the things that we don't like, to chase after the things that we do like. We enjoy that. Yeah, there's a gratification in that, but then we don't realize as we're doing that we're creating the causes of suffering. The causes of happiness, you know, letting go of selfish attitudes. It's hard to do. It's hard work, and we don't like that because it grates against the ego. Like, but I want it. No, I can't stand it. And what about me? There's a friction there, but we like the result. we even though we don't like the cause. So that's part of it. I think also from what you were saying, how people are attached to their suffering, it's very true, because when you have a problem, then it defines your being, And we like that. We've got a nice clear issue, like I'm focused. But that's the problem. I've got this this illness, or I've got this project, or I've got this competition, I've got this enemy, I've got this conflict. And so even though on one level it's difficult, we like it because it gives us a kind of focal point. I mean, I hate to say it, but in this country, people really liked it when Margaret Thatcher was the Prime Minister because she was so hateable. Yeah, all of the liberals, like in America, it was the same with George Bush. The liberals kind of loved to hate him. So, the people got it was an automatic gratification to insult George Bush. George W. Bush was even more extreme. And so it was when he got re-elected, one of the local Dharma teachers in San Francisco area is also a comedian and a radio, kind of has his own radio program. Is a comedian called Wes Niska, so mostly for the liberals in the Bay Area, which there's a lot of sort of liberal lefty types in San Francisco area. It was a sort of day of lamentation when George W. Bush got re-elected. But Wes had this comment, well, another great 4 years for the satirists. Because George Bush was such an easy target. It's like, it's so easy to hate and make fun of. And so, we like something that makes it, even though we would say we don't like a broken leg or we don't like a fatal disease, it gives us a focus. There was a very interesting incident that happened here about 20 years ago when I was living here in the late 80s. There was an American anagarika who came here, and he was just diagnosed as being HIV positive before he came. He'd already was on his way over. And so he arrived, and so he immediately had to get sort of locked into the British health system and organised treatment for him in London. He was going down every month to the hospital. And a very sincere fellow, and very, very, very kind and committed Dharma practitioner. So he'd been here for about 4 or 5 months, maybe 6 months, and I was having tea with the guests in the room at the end here, and then he arrived back from London at the end of the afternoon. It's kind of about this time, about 6:30, 6:45, and the tea time conversation was winding up, and this anagarika, Philip was his name, came in, and he looked really grim. And I thought, oh dear, it must be terrible news, because his condition was holding steady. It wasn't degenerating, and whenever he went and had his tests and got treated, it was always a bit indecisive and unclear about how the disease was progressing or what treatment they should follow, and it was a bit. It was also the early days of the AIDS epidemic. So anyway, so I waited till everybody had gone. So I said, "So what's the news from the hospital, Philip?" And he says, "Well, it's not good." And oh dear, what's this going to be? He said, "I lost my story." I said, "What?" He says, "I've lost my story. I don't have HIV. I've got an immune disease, and it means I have a kind of low level colds and flu, for the rest of my life. But I don't have HIV, and I'm not going to die of this." And he still looked really grim. I said, "Well, that's great. That's great." He says, "No, Ajahn, you don't understand. I've lost my story." And it was very insightful, because he had become aware, he was a very bright guy, he was sort of reflecting, like, he had become so identified of being like, I'm a victim, I've got this terrible disease, I'm going to die, and but I'm okay, I'll practice. And he had this whole kind of inner drama going on about having this fatal illness, and he was going to be like other friends in the States, was going to be dead in 4 or 5 years' time. And he became suddenly aware of how much he was invested in that. Oh, so tragic to die so young, and this terrible disease there's no cure for. And then he lost his story. And so he was grieving the loss of his story. But he also had the wisdom to recognize that was what was happening. So it was a very interesting conversation, and so that I felt that was a really good example of how our suffering can be my most cherished possession, and that when it's taken away from us, oh no, when you haven't got a problem anymore, when the problem gets solved or the debt gets paid off, the house finally gets finished. Oh, I've got to live with you, have I? The project's over? Oh dear. Yeah. It works with monastery development as well, so not just singling out householders, but but that we like that definition. It's also why people like adventure sports, or they like to go hang gliding or climbing up vertical cliffs, because you get very, very focused. All there is that half inch of ledge and your toes. But you're extremely focused at that point. And we like that, even though it's life-threatening. So that kind of, in what you're saying, that dynamic, it's very important to understand that. And that quality of undefined being is terrible. It's death to the ego. Who am I if I haven't got my problem? So we quickly hunt for another problem, or a project, or something to get involved in. Then I can feel like there's a me existing in relationship to that. So I'm not sure about the gratification element of it. You have a fight so that the best part of breaking up is when you're making up again. As they said in the pop song. It's before many people's time. But that basically that dynamic of preferring a problem and a difficulty, the more unrequitable, the better. Something that can't be fixed. It's great, because otherwise you have the problem of getting what you want, and then you're left in this undefined. But that quality, even though it can be very threatening, it feels like we have to rush away from that if we can. It's in a different way. It's our greatest friend, because it's only threatening to the ego. But when we sort of don't relate to things from an ego-centered perspective, then that quality of not being in contention with anything or not lacking anything, it's the experience of fullness. It seems like death to the ego, but it's actually, if you listen to your heart at that point, there's a great quality of wonderment and freedom. But the ego is like, I don't like this, because it's out of a job and it wants to find something to give it some definition again. So in terms of working with that, there's a kind of barrier that you need to go through, of that kind of flailing of the ego, like, but I gotta eat something or do something or go somewhere or relate to someone or something, and you really don't care what. But just to be able to listen to that, to feel that, and recognize, okay, this is just the ego flailing. It's like the tyrant being deposed, or Margaret Thatcher being asked to step down. There's a kind of desperation, but just to let that pass through, and then once that passes, then to notice what remains is the quality of tremendous freedom and wonderment. It's a kind of delightful quality.
I see that great wisdom in your work, but as well, in other side, I want to your comments about what is the link, because look like sometimes we are jokings of ourselves, looking the gratification, physical gratification. I speak more about the physical gratification, the endorphins. looking for
Yeah.
inconscience for physical gratification.
That's the drug of choice.
Yeah. We look like we are junkies of ourselves.
That's I use that same phrase.
How we can be not junkies of ourselves? I mean,
That's what we're doing here. We're getting off the drug.
Try to, perhaps recondition our minds.
Yeah, that's what a monastery is for. This is a detox program. Really, I'm not kidding. I did a whole 10-day retreat. I think Sister Tisara was. Were you on that retreat? Cittaviveka, yes, she was there. I did a whole 10-day retreat on this theme, on dependent origination and the cycles of addiction. And the basic addiction is bhava tanha, the thrill of becoming. And it's interesting. Speaking of endorphins, if you know a little brain chemistry, the moment of maximum thrill, when what's they call the endorphin flush, the largest quantity of endorphins, they land on they're released and they land on this part of the brain called the lateral tegmentum. So as the endorphins hit the lateral tegmentum, that is the whoomph, the yes. That's the drug. And that can come from meditation experience, it can come from seeing some attractive person, it can come from the perfect cheesecake, it can come from scratching an itch, it can come from, bemoaning a broken leg. Oh, poor me, but it's all right, I'm fine. Yeah, it's the same. It's the same endorphins. It's the same stuff, and that's the drug of choice. We love that as the endorphins hit. So that's the drug we have to get off. And when the Buddha was first enlightened, if you think about it, and the picture as it appeared to him after his enlightenment was like, I'm the only living being who's off the drug. So he was on there weren't 7 billion people on the planet at that point, but there's lots of other living beings. But so he has this realization: I'm the only living being in this realm, or any realm, who's fully enlightened. I'm the only one who's not. I'm the only non-addict in an entire universe full of addicts. I'm the only one who's not hooked on the stuff. So his first thought was, there's no point trying to get all other beings off the stuff. And so his first thought was, I'll just go and be a hermit. There's no point trying to convey this because it's everywhere. Every being is addicted to this becoming, bhava. And there's no point even trying. It's just too difficult. It's too vast. It's impossible. And then the way that Dhamma talks are invited, the Brahmachaloka Adipati, that little verse that Anagarikas usually recite, that's a repetition of the invitation from the Brahma Sahampati, saying, please, Venerable Sir, for the sake of those beings who have just a little bit of dust in their eyes, please teach the Dhamma that you understand, because there are some who will be able to grasp the meaning and who will be able to be liberated. Like there are some people who are not as addicted as others that will be able to get off the stuff. And then the Buddha listened to that and then decided to teach. But that's how I see that picture. It's like you realize you're the only being on the planet who's not hooked on the stuff, the only non-junkie. And you're going to help this entire planet full of addicts. It's a daunting task. But that's what monasteries are for, and that's what we're all doing here, is getting off the stuff. And in all our various different particular channels of addiction, whether we're addicted to ideas, or addicted to cheesecake, or addicted to human company, or addicted to self-hatred, whatever it might be, we all have our own particular specialities. But it's recognizing where those attachments are, and slowly getting off the stuff, learning to.
Is that problem to be addicted to happiness?
Yeah, it can be. You name it. You can be attached to it. Okay, one more. Yeah.
You mentioned that the English and the Americans are very averse to metta, the practice of metta, or feeling from the idea, the concept of feeling love for yourself is bad. I think this is very much to do with the Christian culture, whether you're a Christian or not. Because, if you live in the West, brought up in a Christian culture, and Christianity has a negative attitude of thinking good of ourselves. This is selfish. This is blah blah blah, and this is why you get this reaction, and causes all sorts of problems.
Yes, it does. It's there's a whole Judeo-Christian sort of. It's nuanced by various things, like the idea of the doctrine of original sin that was conjured up by St. Augustine, and in the Jewish community, it's not really even theologically based. It's just family, I'd say. The kind of guilt syndrome that you're basically guilty. You're not quite sure of what, but you're guilty, And it was this. There was this years ago at this Harmonia Mundi conference in Los Angeles. Somebody asked the Dalai Lama. It was a big kind of spiritual conference, and somebody asked the Dalai Lama about feelings of guilt and what to do about this persistent feelings of guilt and self-hatred. And His Holiness said, "Well, forgive me if this is being rude, but what have you done that you feel so guilty about? I mean, have you committed some crime, or did you kill somebody in the war, or And the fellow said, "No. I'm a very honest person. I've never done anything like that. I just hate myself." And so then the Dalai Lama his English is pretty good, but he thought. So then he went into a huddle with his translator, Thupten Jinpa. And Thupten Jinpa did a doctorate at Cambridge in Western philosophy. So he was fully acquainted with the Judeo-Christian thing, to use the technical term. And so he went into a huddle, and Thupten Jinpa gave him a sort of quick rundown on the Judeo-Christian self-hatred program, and then he sort of came out of his huddle and said, "Oh, this is most unfortunate." But he couldn't really imagine it. It was hard to put himself in that position.
In Buddhism, I never had really any mention of guilt.
Well, if you have done something that's unskillful, like if I've told you a lie, or I've deliberately hurt you, then I feel hiriyottapa, a sense of shame. But that's recognized as spiritual maturity, of that recognition of if I lie to you, that hurts me, that pain is a useful pain. So hiriyottapa is taken as a kind of great spiritual quality, but it's not personalized. It's not like you're not building a sense of self out of it.
It's regarded as a sort of negative thing. You want to.
You act in a way to free yourself from it. Yeah.
It's not going to do you any good, or
the freedom from remorse, avipatisara, is one of the a basis of the sense of well-being and happiness is avipatisara. And the way that you establish freedom from remorse is that you don't do unskillful things. It's the Buddhist program for developing a positive self-view. Don't do things that you'll regret, and then you won't have to regret them. It's a very simplistic approach to having a positive self-image, but it is kind of very simple and straightforward in that way. Well, in the West, we do have these doctrines like original sin. Also, when the King of Thailand was being interviewed by the BBC years and years ago, there was a very interesting documentary, and they asked him, about what he saw as the difference between Western thinking and thinking in Thailand, and he talked about this. He said, "Well, you have the doctrine of original sin, but in Buddhism we think more in terms of original purity." Yeah. So that your whole framework for the way the universe is arranged is very, very different. Or like I was quoting the other day in a Dhamma talk, Freudian psychology. You have quote. I don't know. I can't remember the German of it if I ever knew it, but what he called the black tide of mud is the id, the sort of fundamental nature of your being, is what he referred to as the black tide of mud. The sort of these primal forces, like the reptile brain, that he saw that as the fundamental nature of our being, is the reactivity and selfishness of the reptile brain. So, I'm sure it sounds very gnarly in German, but the black tide of mud as this sort of, that's when you look into your fundamental nature, that's at the very basis of our being. That's what you find. So, well, thanks very much for Sigmund. But that was his experience. But the Buddhist model is very different, where rather than the black tide of mud. I mean, nothing wrong with blackness or mud, but that kind of he's using those words to represent a kind of sort of stinky, fetid stuff down at the bottom of the pond, And but instead, you have the Dhamma is the quality at the basis of everything, which gives you a very, very different model.
Much healthier model.
Well, that's why I'm a Buddhist. I gave up on Freud. I had the very first term studying psychology at university, and in this lecture, they quoted Freud as saying, and this is like I don't think it was the very first book of Freud's, but maybe it was the second one, like the Interpretation of Dreams, and he says something like, "The best that my method can do is to transform your neurotic misery into ordinary human unhappiness." Again, I'm sure it sounds great in German. The best that my method can do is to transform your neurotic misery into ordinary human unhappiness. So when I heard that, something snapped. And I was a kind of confused, half-stoned 18-year-old, But something just went, no, that's not right, And so I immediately started arguing with the lecturer, and I couldn't base it on anything other than my own sort of random philosophizing thoughts and my own sort of feelings. But it just seemed, no, we can do better than that. That can't be the most that humanity can look forward to.
Was your lecturer a believer in the Freudian school? To me, my limited dealings with them, it's like a religious system, almost.
Well, he wasn't. I mean, he was a lecturer in psychology, but he wasn't a Freudian analyst. But certainly, he put it forward as a valid perspective, and he didn't go along with my arguments because, of course, it was just me thinking. I couldn't back it up with anything other than it's my opinion, so it must be right, Anyway, I think that's enough. Speaking of opinions, must be about enough for this evening. Annamayang Dhammagata